One. Okay. All right. So, hi everybody. This is Dorian with MedTech Trends. I'm here today with Christopher Macmillan. So, Chris and I actually met through a program. It's called the London Real Biz Act program. So, we've been talking to each other and colleagues for a short amount of time. But he's here with me today, and we're talking about the cannabis industry and his role within this industry and what he'd like to do. So, Chris, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This is awesome.
Awesome. Okay, so Chris, I'm a bit of a newbie on this topic. I did have a chance to look into this a little bit based on some conversations that we've had before, and one of the things that you brought to my attention was a guy named Rick Simpson, and I'd love to get into that topic a little bit. But first, I thought maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you got into this and what your passion is in this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I was probably, now that I think about it more often, it's more than 10 years ago. But I read an article. It was talking about THC, which is a component in cannabis, and that was actually killing cancer cells. And that just I was like, oh wow, that's really interesting. So I started doing research, and I remember I just randomly searched in marijuana or something like that, and cancer, and Rick Simpson's video came up, and that documentary is called Run from the Cure. And after watching that just blew me away, because this guy, if you watch the documentary, he's making a concentrated oil, and he's giving this oil away for free for cancer patients, people that have IBS, they have PTSD, and all these other issues, and he's just giving it away for free. So that was like my start. And then I worked in construction and stuff like that, and then I move around quite a bit throughout Canada. And I ended up in British Columbia, and a friend of mine just said, "Hey, do you want to work for this medical? Help me out with this medical grow?" And I said yes, and then I just kept on working for different medical grows and stuff like that. And then eventually, as I got more and more connected to the cannabis industry, I was asked by another friend to manage a medical dispensary that was opening up in the Okanagan region, northern Okanagan region in British Columbia. So that's kind of how it all got started in a nutshell.
That's awesome. I definitely want to ask you a little bit more about your take on Rick Simpson, because I did have a chance to watch that documentary, and I was blown away by the story. It's just one of those things that you think you have to hear it from the person firsthand. Otherwise, you're like, is this real? But it actually is real. He's got a pretty incredible story. So I'll ask you a little bit more about that, because I'd love to get into it. But how long ago did you get into this industry? You said it's been a couple of years?
Yeah, it's been probably almost 5 years now that I've been in the industry. Majority of that, it was 2 years that we ran our shop. Now it sounds like a really weird thing to say, but because of legalization, because we were actually in a gray market, and because of legalization, all the dispensaries that were currently running, giving medical patients, which is legal in Canada, so you're allowed to carry cannabis and have cannabis and use it if you have a medical prescription from a doctor, but there was nowhere to get it. So they created compassion clubs and dispensaries, and the municipalities and the province, depending on the province that you're in, either allowed it or did not allow it. And the one we were in allowed it. So that's what our job was, to provide the medicine for them. I did that for 2 years.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So during the 2 years, were you how did the shop work essentially? Were you let's say advising, I'm not sure what the best word would be, but were you interacting with patients? Or is this like B2B type of things? Like were you helping other stores distribute or make sales, or was it directly, a patient would walk in and say, I'm dealing with a certain problem, and then you would make a recommendation?
Right. So we were directly working with the patient. So they had to have some sort of medical paperwork with them, whether that be a prescription for something else that cannabis would be an alternative to, or they had to have like documentation say that they had, that they were dealing with cancer, or that they were dealing with just arthritis or some sort of doctor's information. Or they could just go to a lawyer or a notary and just, they were getting a notarized letter stating that they were using it for medical purposes. So, one of those ways around, and that's how they were able to enter into the store. And then we would go through, my staff and I would go talk to them and help them pick out a product that was going to be beneficial for them.
Mm-hmm. And like, just out of curiosity, was there anybody, and the reason why I wanted to ask this question is because so I just read an article, and from the process that you just mentioned, it sounds a lot like that's pretty consistent with what is still happening today. So in other words, like it's legal, you can sell a medical grade or medicinal marijuana, and then but as a patient, even if you get a prescription, before you can actually get the product, you have to register as a patient. From what I understand, does that still apply today? Do you know?
Well, here in Canada, recreationally, it's now legalized as of October 17th. So anybody that is over the age of 19 or 18, depending on, so federally it's 18, but from province to province, it could be up to 19. Then you can purchase cannabis legally anyway. But there is still patients that get prescription for cannabis, and then that either allows them to get some sort of a discount, or allows them to grow their own cannabis, or have, if they're not able to do it, have someone grow for them.
Okay. Yeah, no, okay, so this is so it sounds like it's pretty like readily accessible for the most part.
Yes, it is. It's definitely, it's accessible. There's a lot of things that need to, in my opinion, need to get better. Edibles, when legalization happened here in Canada, edibles were taken away and concentrates were taken away. So patients that were using those things, they no longer have access to those. That's in the plate to become legalized in the next year. But the fact that they, had them, and now it's no longer, now they have to make their own stuff. That's sort of something that we have to work around, that, as Canadians we'll have to figure out. And then as far as the states goes, I mean, each state has its own laws. Like I know California is different from Colorado, for example, and stuff like that. So.
Right. I actually I had gone to I did a trip to California late last year, and it seemed to me that some people were still kind of like iffy about talking about it out in the open, which I wasn't really sure why. Like I would have, let's say if I approached somebody and just said, if I wanted to get like an edible, I would ask somebody, but like some of the people just kind of, I didn't get like as open of a response as I was thinking, because I assumed it's just legal, but I'm not sure if they, it's like there's a fine line between, how it's supposed to work or something like that. I just assumed that it was like completely out in the open. Same in Canada, like when it was announced that that they were going to legalize it, I just kind of assumed that, overnight, for the most part, it would just go from, still like a bit of a taboo thing, and like, you have to work your way around the system or whatever to obtain it if you want it for recreational purposes, and then the next day it would just be like, yeah, everybody's out in the open just kind of using it and talking about it and like where to get it and all this kind of stuff. But it doesn't seem like that's still the case. It's almost like there's still a lot of like resistance to it. I don't know if you like being in the industry. I don't know if you can sense that.
Yeah, no, I completely sense that. Even in the community, I'm in a small community place called Salmon Arm, and there's only like 17,000 people, and there's still quite a few of resistance to it. I find it, mostly in the older population, but because of all the propaganda saying how it's going to lead to another drug like cocaine or heroin or something like that.
Right, right,
So
right.
people still think that cannabis is addictive, for example, which is not. Like psychologically, it can be, but physiologically, it's not. Like you're not gonna have withdrawals symptoms. Just the fact that habitual habit. That's a psychological thing, not a. There's no physical, thing where you're just like, oh, I need that right now. It's not like a cigarette or alcohol or something.
Yeah, and I've heard that that before as well. It's not the same effect, but even that's an interesting point to me because there is definitely like a psychological component to people behind people using it. So like on the one hand, I think there are more and more people and more studies coming out showing that, you know, the evidence is sort of pointing toward there could potentially be some really beneficial effects. But on the flip side, I think there's still this train of thought that like you um, it might have some harmful, like in the same sense as people think about tobacco, right? I mean, like you try a cigarette once and then you kind of crave a second one, and then but there's all these harmful substances and you develop um, a habit, and then that turns into an addiction.
Right.
It doesn't, to me, like it doesn't seem to work the same way for cannabis, and so right. I mean, it does. It's not the same. It's not the same
No,
thing.
it's the safest. I mean, I don't even really. I mean, if you want to call it a drug, you can, but it's the safest. If you want to call it a drug, it's the safest drug there is in the world that we know of. Just for example, the study is out that they figured that the lethal dose has never been actually quantitative. So they think that you'd have to have about 800 cannabis cigarettes in 15 minutes before that you would, you know.
Jeez.
But at that point, it's like that's lack of oxygen that you're dying of too. So, and the other thing is that they don't feel that there's actually, besides a little bit of lung damage, but there's no cause of cancer, for example, from smoking. As long as you're not mixing it with other things and it's a clean product as well, there's no cancer causing agent that they can find. And it's it and the other reason that it's so safe is because unlike other drugs that people, whether that be uh, heroin or something like that, like a harsher drug, or even alcohol, if you take too much of those drugs, your respiratory system shuts down. And with cannabis, it doesn't. So you might feel really uncomfortable. You might actually pass out, but your breathing is going to continue and your heart's going to continue. So that's the reason that cannabis is so different compared to any other drug out there like opioids or something like that.
Yeah, those have to be extreme cases. Like I've never heard of anybody going through that kind of experience. But one of the things that I have heard is so this is just anecdotal, but like some people will say that if you smoke it, which is obviously a very different thing than taking it for medicinal purposes, but although I suppose you could smoke it for that purpose as well. But
Mm-hmm.
some people will say they experience some form of like heightened paranoia or something like that. I've heard that from a couple people, but for the most part, I mean, like the levels that you would need to get to actually have an actual harmful effect, like that would have to be pretty darn high. And in most cases, what does it really do if you smoke like quite a bit or something? It just kind of makes you feel sleepy, maybe drowsy, or depending on the strain, and that's pretty much it. Or maybe it just kind of puts you in a good mood, and that's really it. It's not if you smoke too many cigarettes, you got problems. Or if you drink too much alcohol, you got some serious problems. But I've never heard of it getting to that point with marijuana.
Yeah, the only thing that I would say to that is that there is psychosis that can happen if you're already prone to having that issue. So, something like that, I would definitely steer people away. There is certain varieties, or what we call, we say strains, but varieties is probably a better term, is that might cause anxiety, and that sort of thing. So, that's why we want to educate people so that they're using it the right way, or if there's someone that's really sensitive, they're using a low dose of THC, or they're only using CBD, for example. So I always tell people, cannabis might not be for you. And if it doesn't agree with you, either go with a much lower dose or use CBD only, or don't use it at all. Like, people always think like, oh, you're super pro cannabis, and I am, absolutely. But personally for me, like I used to use quite a bit. Now I use a really low THC and a CBD product. It's a high CBD product that I use. So,
Okay.
I always tell people, it can be, there is negative effects. Like if you take too much, it's really, like if you eat too much cannabis, it's really uncomfortable. You feel like you might die, but you won't, which is kind of, kind of
Right.
cool. Obviously.
That's it. Yeah, that's really interesting. So then just out of curiosity, what would you recommend it for? Like what kind of patients have come into your store before and you've said, you know what, maybe you want to try this product?
Yeah, I mean, I've had from an old lady that had really bad arthritis. She was 86, could barely walk, and then comes back like 3 months later, and she's only using a cane, and she's all excited. She's like, I barely need this thing. To someone that has cancer, MS, Parkinson's. I have people that use we find them the right strain for depression or anxiety, and to general pain, headaches, you name it, the ailment. Like it works for so many different things that it's actually crazy. But yeah.
Can you think of like one example that, like, let's say was beyond what you expected? Like you were just kind of trying it out or suggesting it, but then it came back with like amazing results? Actually, even on the flip side, can you think of anything where you had to tell someone, hey, maybe you want to stop using this and try something else?
I think I can't remember what they came in for, but I know that there was definitely one gentleman that came in, and he was just wanting, all this things that was going to cure everything that he had wrong with him. And I asked him about his diet and stuff like that, and he wasn't really willing to change his diet, and he was wanting it for like it does help with your digestive issues and stomach issues. But I really encouraged him. I was like, and he was also using it for like a crutch. I could tell that he was using it just to get away from his problems. And so I said, you're not dealing with your issues firsthand. You need to deal with that first. I mean, we can use cannabis to guide that place, but you gotta change your dietary issue, your outlook on life, and obviously I still sold it to him because that's what he wanted. But my advice was like, hey, you need to change more than cannabis is not a magic pill. We have to change our lifestyle.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's in the same way that the nutrient industry has like blown up, right? Or like the supplement industry has like really blown up. But I think if anybody makes the argument that all you have to do is just take your vitamins and vitamin pill and like you're good to go, like that never worked for anybody, right? At the end of the day, you got to take a holistic approach to whatever you need to, whatever your lifestyle is, to be able to maintain your health and optimize your health. So I guess in a sense, maybe from that argument, cannabis can be both something with real medicinal properties that can help relieve symptoms and and actually make your physiology better, or your chemistry better, but at the same time, it's got to be paired up with other stuff, right?
Yeah,
Maybe, and yeah, go
absolutely.
ahead, go, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I would often tell people, especially if they were dealing with depression or anxiety, to use like a product. There was a product that you have here. It's EM Power, and it's a nootropic product. So it's got vitamins, minerals, amino acids. It's all combined together. I said this is really good because what's happening is you're not, even though you might be eating a healthy diet, there's genes that aren't allowing certain minerals and vitamins to get to your brain, so you're not in balance. So the combination of those things, and then I was also telling people to use uh, medicinal mushrooms such as lion's mane. If they were dealing with memory loss, or if they had early stages of Alzheimer's, for example.
Hmm. Yes, speaking of Alzheimer's, and you mentioned cancer before as well. I just came across somebody on my Facebook, and I had added this person because we had a bunch of mutual friends. I don't know her directly, but she was talking about um, breast cancer, and just basically saying things that are, I would say, not like non-conventional wisdom. But since you mentioned cancer as well, and actually this goes back to Rick Simpson's documentary. Um, there really seems to be some kind of connection there. And I haven't done the homework myself to read up on it, but it seems like there definitely is some sort of connection, or at least a potential for connection. So I like in Rick Simpson's documentary, he was talking about how he got diagnosed with a type of carcinoma. So he had a skin type of cancer, and he was applying the hemp oil, cannabis oil, onto the parts of his skin that were affected, like visibly affected, and through that process, he helped to kind of, I don't know if he cured himself or if he just like helped it go away to the point where it wasn't visible anymore. But certainly I think he's still alive right now, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so he's done pretty well using using hemp oil as a therapy, and of course he ended up advising a lot of other people and helping out a lot of people using the products that he was growing. Um, like it just, I can't, my scientific mind, or my, I don't even know if that's the best way to put it, the part of my brain that's accustomed to kind of thinking about things as, if a product went through a clinical trial and it was proven statistically to have a certain effect beyond placebo, then we know it works effectively. I think that piece in my mind for some reason is missing, and so that always makes me wonder, is there a connection, or is it really anecdotal, or is it just by chance or something like that? But when so many people talk about it as actually having this type of effect, and not just in cancer, but like you said, in Alzheimer's and any a bunch of different inflammatory diseases like arthritis, you can't ignore it at that point. At that
Right.
point, it's like, yeah, there's something there.
Yeah. So basically, what's going on there is, I can explain it this way. If you want to look at it scientifically, we have what's referred to as an endocannabinoid system. So our body already produces cannabinoids, and plants, as an example, echinacea, cacao, and of course cannabis produce phytocannabinoids. So they're produced through photosynthesis. Cannabis just happens to be the one plant that we are aware of at this point. Maybe you might find one in the Amazon jungle somewhere that produces more. But at this point, cannabis produces the most phytocannabinoids that we know of today. And when we intake it, then that balances out our endocannabinoid system if it's out of whack. So that's in a small nutshell what's
Hmm.
going on there.
And I guess that system is somehow connected to the same, let's say, disease pathway as a lot of other diseases that we know about.
Yeah.
Like if I think underlying, like there are certainly like common pathways to um, between oncology and or I shouldn't say oncology, between like cancers, let's say, and the pathways that cause other diseases. There's definitely some commonalities that we've known about for many years now, and so the pathway that you just mentioned, that must fit somewhere in between there. And so I guess the thing is, affect that, then it has downstream effects in terms of, cancers and other diseases as well.
Right, right. So basically, if you think about it this way, it's to simplify it. Yeah, when the endocannabinoid system is working properly, then it's allowing those genes to work properly. So it's taking away anything that, because a cancer is, as we know, is basically something that's not. I'm trying to find losing my words here.
Doors, doors.
But yeah, it's something that is being created out of, totally lost my train of thought here. It's something that's being created that's not, is an abnormality. And so the THC is like fixing that, and then killing that in a sense. That makes sense.
Yeah, I know for sure. I think that's a super interesting topic. I'd love to get into that a little bit more. I got to do more background reading on that because I think it's becoming really relevant today. And actually, on that topic, which is another thing that I found really interesting that Rick talks about in his documentary, or at least the one that I watched, is so he, like, back at that time, he was going around and he was talking to physicians, and of course, physicians are. I don't know, maybe this is just one of those things that's really not, it's probably on people's radars now, but back then it was not something that was taught, and so it was not something that would come naturally. Nowadays it's probably a little bit different. Maybe they're more familiar with the topic and with the chemistry, the biochemistry that underlies these diseases, and so they can sort of make an intuitive connection between, how the chemicals in cannabis, the plant, works and what effect it would have on various diseases. So but it's more salient. It's on people's minds now. But still, I don't know how willing physicians are to prescribe nowadays. So I'm not sure. What do you think?
Well, at least here, I mean, I can't speak in United States, but I can speak in Canada that they're starting to become a lot more open to prescribing it. Especially, they feel really comfortable with CBD. Because it's non-psychoactive, and they're, some of them are becoming more comfortable with prescribing THC, but the fact that the CBD is sort of the new. It's funny that it's considered the new kid on the block, but actually it's one of the first molecules that was discovered before THC, by Raphael Mushili from Israel. If I probably butchered his name, but
I wouldn't know.
But anyways, if 1963, he was the one that discovered that molecule, and then I think it was in 65 he was able to discover THC. But anyway, the fact is that doctors are learning more and more about cannabis. And when I was working in the dispensary, I've actually had phone calls not only from doctors but from pharmacists trying to figure out.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Huh. That's interesting. Okay. So it's on the radar. They're definitely reaching out to suppliers. I don't know if that would or at least dispensaries.
Yeah.
Actually having these conversations about them. This is really cool because yeah, wow, okay. I mean, the best place to get your information if you're not really familiar with it is you got to talk to either a pharmacist or someone else who's actually a specialist in different things, right? Like alternative medicine, like a physician would have to call up somebody that works in that, or a naturopathic doctor, same thing. As you can't, as a physician, you won't always know what's out there in terms of every single specialty. So it's interesting to hear that that they would have actually called you guys up and had a conversation about it. So you found that there were quite a few that were actually open to having that dialogue.
Yeah, there was definitely a few, and I found it really interesting because, again, I, currently live in a small town, and the fact that people would talk about, patients would talk about certain doctors, so you got to know at least their name. Like I've never met them personally, but I at least got to know their names. And, they'd say Dr. So-and-so was against cannabis. And then I get a phone call from that same doctor, a half a year later or something, 6 months later, and asking like, how much do I prescribe? Like, I mean, they have no
Huh.
idea. And to be, and I always told them like, well, you really have to ask a lot of questions, and see where if they've even tried it before. I mean, I wish doctors would like ask these questions, like, uh, when you take Tylenol, do you need to take a half a Tylenol, or do you need to take 3 Tylenols to get rid of your headache? And that sort
Yeah.
of gets you a little bit of an understanding on the threshold of how they react to substances. And if usually they're really sensitive, then we, tailor that down to a lower dose, like 2.5 milligrams or 5 milligrams or something like that.
Yeah,
So
for sure. I think you're touching on the topic of like how to personalize really everything to individual patients, right? Which is
yeah,
not something that, well, it's a challenge certainly, and I don't know how optimized that is, right? But I think as soon as you involve more people into, I think there's this term in healthcare, they call it like the circle of care. I think there's probably different synonyms for it, but essentially it's like a team of people that are all looking after a certain patient, and the team is really comprised of a bunch of different specialties, right? Physician plays a role, pharmacist plays a role, dietitian plays a role, and all these other people kind of play a role. And that's really the idea of like personalized care, is everything sort of tailored to what an individual patient needs, which is really cool. I mean, and I'm glad that that the medicinal cannabis is kind of looked at from that perspective as well, because people still, at the end of the day, they're going to react differently to the same product, right? Like
yes.
people, yeah. So even from my personal experience, I know that like even if I was using the exact same thing as like a friend of mine, then I know that we're going to experience it a little bit differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every person reacts to every sort of chemical that you put into your body, every food that you ingest. It's all, it's, everyone reacts to everything differently. Some people are allergic to peanuts.
Right.
So, um, yeah, and the same goes for cannabis. And cannabis is such a really interesting thing that it's just like I'm always finding something new about it. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Like now they're looking at their thinking is that, for example, with pain medications and stuff like that, pharmaceutical stuff, they usually go with how much you weigh. This is how many milligrams of morphine, for example, that someone your size would need. But with cannabis, it's actually they're actually looking at age. So the younger you are,
Hmm.
you probably for a certain illness, you're probably going to need more than if you're someone that's like in their 70s or 80s.
Tolerance, I'm guessing, is
Yeah.
another thing. Like if you're a regular user, you're going to need a little bit more too, right?
Yeah, and that's another thing too. For tolerance, that's definitely somewhat of a factor. But what we can do with that, which is really interesting, is uh, because we can actually tailor. So if we're using a large amount, what we can actually do is bring that down. So use less, and then we can go back to something maybe a little bit more medium. So use less for a while, and your body will start to be like, oh, I'm only getting this much THC, only this much CBD, this much terpenes, etc. Then I need to react differently, and then all of a sudden you're getting you're getting where it's working again.
Right. Right. Okay. Yeah, this is really, really cool stuff. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about the industry, sort of like a landscape of what the industry really looks like, in a couple different sectors, and then I definitely want to get into the projects that you're working on, and the vision that you have as well. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, so you'd mentioned, okay, so let's start with like the idea of how to actually access this. So in Canada, and I'm in Toronto, by the way. So being part of this system, so I know that you can order at a dispensary. You can order online, and then I believe they're also opening up a physical location, so you can actually go into a real physical store, and you can purchase that way as well. So the purchasing part of it, I think, is like set up to an extent, and you can do the online, you can do the brick and mortar store as well. And for medicinal uses, you would need to actually go to your physician, get a prescription, and then you can go to then register as a patient, from what I understand, and then go and actually get your prescription. And then what happens at that point? Like, are there any are you just kind of like off on your own? Is there like a way to kind of follow up? Are there like websites to go to? Are there different companies offering different services?
Yeah, there's definitely different definitely different services out there. The thing is like there's all these companies that I used to know no longer exist because they're not like so. All these different hubs that people used to go for medical help, they no longer exist. So like I'm relearning, trying to find these like new groups. I'm just a prime example. We were the number one store in British Columbia, ranked by Leafly.com, and we're no longer open anymore. I mean, we could have went through the paperwork and reopened, but for different reasons, we didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, now they're kind of they're just telling everybody to go to the recreational store. So in I know like in Ontario, I think where you're at, the first stores aren't going to open until like April or something.
Right. Yeah, toward the end of the year.
Stores, and then right now you're just ordering from the online aspect, right?
Yeah, which there's a huge lag, or people are complaining about that quite a bit, and even with the physical locations, so it's interesting because they did it by vote, so every jurisdiction has had an ability to vote up or vote down for actually opening up a store, and so it is pretty predictable, which towns were not going to let a store open up and which ones were probably going to let them open up, but. Yeah, it doesn't seem like the supply is going to really meet the demand, and that was kind of expected. It's been like this for a long time. But even once you get your product, and specifically for the medicinal purposes, then at that point, like, what else is there out there, right? I mean, there are stores that sell all kinds of products like vaporizers or all kinds of physical products, but are there any or how good is the service behind the whole industry, really? Is there a gap anywhere, do you think?
Oh, in my opinion, there's a huge gap between because you have these stores that are opening up, and they don't, their staff, from my observation, are not trained to tell people like what's the difference between I walked into one store one time and they didn't know the difference between indica and sativa. I mean, that's like the most basic basic thing. Like, sativa gives you energy and indica, right. So I think there's a huge educational aspect that needs to be done, so that people know like what they're doing and how to approach people to say like, yeah, no, I think you're taking a blood pressure medication. Well, CBD is going to reduce your blood pressure, so let's figure out, like, talk to your doctor about reducing that, or be very careful about watching your blood pressure so it doesn't drop too low, for example. Mm-hmm. So
you're talking about you're talking about education both on the part of the seller and the buyer. So yeah. Consumers also need to know a lot more about this to see if so that they can make a decision.
Absolutely. Yeah. They need to know what they're getting. Unfortunately, what I'm kind of seeing that when you go to like the products from the big companies that they're all licensed producers, like Aurora and Tweed and so on and so forth. They're of course third party tested, but they're only really testing for like THC and CBD levels. They're not testing, or at least that I've seen anyway. Hopefully that'll change. But like, what I want to see the other cannabinoids that are in there. I want to see the terpenes that are in there, because even though you give cannabis a name, doesn't mean that that's actually what it is, because genetic markers are, it's been in the black market, so we don't really know for sure that this is going to be, Bubba Kush, or it's going to be Blue Diamond or something like that, or Maui Wowie or any of these names. We don't know for sure.
I've heard some of the weirdest names. Yeah.
It's supposed to be that. And if you go to leafly.com and you read up about it, then these are the terpene profile that's supposed to be in that plant. But if they're not testing the terpene profile, then how do we know that that's going to be the result that you're looking for? And I'll just digress a little bit about that, and why I mentioned that is because it's the terpenes that are making you feel the way you are. So,
Okay.
So if you have something that's mycene, which is in mango, is a terpene found in mango. This is going to make you like really sedative, right? Effect. And
Okay.
this is like the actual thing that's actually making you. It's not the THC. It's the THC is going to get you that high, but it's actually going to be the terpene itself that is going to give you either the uplifting effect or the down effect. So this is why it's like, okay, well, we need to know what the terpenes are, so that you're going to be able to figure out what it's going to do for me.
Yeah, yeah. You're talking about like a product label, right? Like in the same way as you get a nutrition label if you want to go buy like mango juice or whatever. You're talking about like a full product label for all the cannabis products as well, right?
Yeah, or it doesn't necessarily have to be like on the actual label, but I mean, you could have, if a patient was looking for that, then they're looking for a certain terpene profile that they've researched on, or they tell the bud tender that's one serving them, this is what their kind of effect that they're looking for. Then they can look through a number, on an iPad or a ThinkPad, and just sort of say, oh, well, this one was tested to have these terpene profiles in there, and these cannabinoids, and it's, oh, this one's actually like a 1-to-1 ratio of CBD THC, and this is probably going to be an effect that you're going to feel.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think, let's say if I'm a prescriber, whether that's like just a physician or a registered physician, or maybe eventually even a pharmacist might be able to prescribe. I'm not sure. That's an interesting topic too. But so if I'm trying to find out more information, where do I go? Like how would I even know what products there are to prescribe?
Look, you'd have to go to the each government sites. Like there's because each province sells its own different products. So you have to actually go to the BC Cannabis store here in British Columbia and review the tinctures and the types of cannabis strains or varieties that they're selling. And then you would be able to figure out from there, hopefully it's labeled well enough that they'd be able to figure out, okay, this is what they're selling, so this is what I can offer and suggest to you.
Geez, there's a huge education piece. I'm just sensing that now. Like for anybody that isn't familiar, actually, for anybody that ever had this way of thinking that it's just another drug and it's taboo and they wanted to stay away from it, now all of a sudden there's this huge, brand new topic that there's a lot to know about. And then if you never thought about it, if you pushed away that topic before, now it's like there's a wealth of stuff to know about it, to be able to make a decision. So yeah, there's a huge education piece. I totally agree with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. There's so much that we need to know. I mean, uh, people, always come to me and I'm like, yeah, okay, I know quite a bit, but they're like, I realize how much I don't know. Like, it's
There,
just,
yeah,
yeah,
it's huge. It's huge. Yeah, there's always somebody that knows a lot more. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I'm
And
like,
this has been around for like a long time too. Is the other thing is like that's the
mhm,
thing that boggles my mind, right? Like the research has been around for a long time. I think they pointed out some research out of the University of Virginia, I think, in
mhm.
the Rick Simpson documentary. So the ideas have been there for a while, but it's just been like kind of hush hush, not definitely not mainstream. It's almost like we got to go back and relearn what was discovered and written about way back then, and then on top of that, everything that we've learned along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you just have to do a quick Google search today and 1920s cannabis medicine, and you'll see all these tincture bottles that are for flu, for digestive aids, and it has cannabis sativa on it or cannabis indica written right on the
Wow,
bottle. And
wow.
you know, and this is something that was in every doctor's, kit
Hmm.
was some form of cannabis product. And then when prohibition was happening, they changed the word from cannabis to marijuana, and the doctors didn't know. They didn't like, I don't know what marijuana is, and then they weren't able to actually like kind of like protest it, and then it was already became illegal at that point. So before they kind of figured it out.
It's really fascinating history. I just can't believe it's been around for that long, and it's like what happened, man? It's crazy. It's crazy to think about that. Um,
Yeah, I
so
mean, I have my theories. Like my theory is probably had to do more with, in my opinion, and more had to do with the actual industrial side of cannabis itself, because companies like DuPont were using like tree pulp and stuff like that to make paper, and hemp you don't need nearly as much chemicals and stuff like that. So there's aspects like this. You're able to make plastics, and so that's another thing. You can look up the Henry Ford hemp car, and you can see the video of them smashing.
there's a Henry Ford hemp car. I gotta
Yeah,
look that one up.
yeah, they're smashing with like a hedge sledgehammer or something like that, or I forget what it is, but they're just showing how
Jeez.
strong the plastic is. And yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I just the sort of the research that I've done, I kind of think it was to do to the the hemp industry, and then the other aspect that at roughly the same time, prohibition for alcohol was just leaving, and so all those guys that had jobs no longer had jobs, and they're like, well, what can we lobby? What can we bring a job? And then they looked at cannabis, and then out came reefer madness, and the rest is
The
history.
rest is history.
Just in a short time, we lost all this information that we used to know,
Jeez.
um, about cannabis. And obviously now, I think the big thing now is that because it went into the black market, it was forced into the black market. All of a sudden, you know, back in that time, you were still using the male and the female plant, so you still got seeds. So the when you extracted the oil from it or smoked it, it was not as strong because of the seeds, and you weren't using all these conventional things to make the. Now we're only using in the medical side, we're only using the female flower, and it's trying to attract more pollen, so it's producing more and more uh, resin so that it can attract that pollen in there, which is not actually happening. So we've bred it with different varieties and stuff like that to make it stronger as well. So there is that part of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay, I had no idea. I didn't know that they were using just the female plant, and
Mhm.
yeah, that's a really interesting connection. Okay, all right. So obviously, there's a lot of information to know, and you're definitely knowledgeable on this topic. So really appreciate that. Okay, I just want to pivot to what your vision is and what you had in mind for doing over starting recently and over the next couple of years.
Yeah, so recently I've developed a package for whether you're going to be using yourself or you have a loved one that's going to be interested in using cannabis, or you're wanting to get into the industry and you have no idea where to start. I'm developing a course so that you can have a basic understanding of, what products you should use, how to use them, and that sort of thing. And yeah, I'm going to be launching that the first part of April. And that's going to be my website is budtenderacademy.online.
Okay, cool. And okay, and is this going to be like a digital course, or is it like a kit, or what did you have in mind?
Yeah, exactly. So it's going to be a digital course, and it's going to be understanding the mystery of cannabis. And yeah, I'm going to have just like sort of I have 6 parts to it. So like understanding the differences between THC and CBD, knowing what strains are, or learning that you. I'd like to introduce the fact that we should start using varieties except instead of strains. Um, and then we're going to be looking at like how to use it in day-to-day life, what terpenes are used for and why that's important, and using it within daily life. So it'll be every week you'll be given like a video and like a worksheet to help out, so you can really understand. So those should be required to do some journaling depending on which point you are, to understand if you're already using it, what's working for you, what's not, and or if it's even something that you should be taking, or if you're on the other end, if you're wanting to become a bud tender or get into the industry, these are vital things to know so that you can ask the right questions for your patients when they walk into the door. I mean, I understand that it's, of course, people say, oh, it's recreational, but I can tell you that the amount of people that came into our doors, uh, there were there were majority of the people that came into our door never used cannabis before. They were 45 plus, and so we had to really dive in deep and ask them really good questions like, hey, how do you react to this? How do you react to that? Have you ever tried it before? What was your reaction if you have? And what do you feel comfortable with using after you explain this? So this, that's going to be sort of an overview. And then into the future, I'll be doing, I'd like to do some consulting and deeper things like that. So.
Okay, okay. I was going to ask you about that as well. So this is something that you want to get up and running, because obviously there's a huge demand for the education piece, and there's obviously a huge gap in it as well, given that it's such a recent topic that's become like very mainstream. There's a lot of people that want to know about this, and that can benefit by knowing a lot more to make their own decisions or to be able to prescribe. And then you mentioned, so you want to be able to grow that into potentially a consultancy down the road. And I think you also brought up the idea of eventually getting into like using hemp for construction purposes.
Yeah, yeah. So that would probably be, 5 to 10 years down the road after I get this other project that I want to do. But industrial cannabis is something that's all, has been a passion of mine as well. And I just see all the amazing things that it can do. So I want to be somehow, I'd love to be involved with that some way, shape, or form, whether it be materials for biodegradable plastics, or hempcrete, which is an alternative to concrete. So instead of having rock and sand, you just have like hemp fibers with your lime and water, and that's basically all you need. And then the list goes on and on. What hemp? There's like 100,000 different products that you can make with hemp, but not many people are utilizing that yet. And we have majority of what's used in hemp is the hemp seed for either hemp hearts, hemp proteins, or they're extracting it for like hemp oil, for like cooking and salads and that sort of thing. So, I mean, and then I mean, I talked to some people in Alberta, and I'm like, well, what do you guys do with your fiber? And they're like, we just burn it. And it's just like, we've been using this. So,
Jeez.
I mean, that's like, you know, what I'd like to eventually move into as time goes on, and we'll see how quickly that happens. But yeah, you know, and then I would love to get into some more health things as well. Like, I'm definitely passionate about you know, different medicinal mushrooms, like I mentioned, lion's mane, chaga, reishi, all that type of stuff too. So, you know, all of those aspects, yeah, I'd love to get involved in, and seeing what works, what doesn't.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome to hear, man. Absolutely. Okay, Chris, is there anything anything else that we haven't talked about that you really wanted to bring up?
Yeah. I would just like to mention, since we were just talking about Rick Simpson, is that people out there, there's a lot of people selling Rick Simpson oil, and it's not Rick Simpson oil. Rick Simpson oil is very, very concentrated oil. It's if per gram, it's roughly 950 milligrams of THC per gram, and then there's still CBD and cannabinoids and waxes in there. But majority of people that are producing it, or they're calling in their stuff Phoenix Tears or Rick Simpson oil, and it's made from shake or lower buds. And when Rick Simpson was making the oil and giving it away for free, by the way, he was making it from the best buds and getting the best oil from it. And that's why people that had, if you watch the documentary Run from the Cure, people that had terminal cancer, that's why it was working, is because it was very, very potent. And the people that were using it for example, cancer, they were using it for 3 to 6 months, very high doses, and they were pretty much sleeping the whole time because it's so potent. So that's another thing that I'd like to let people know, that I mean, when you're dealing with something like cancer, it's not easy. It's definitely it's not an easy road, but I've met a number of people that this has turned their life around, because they went through the dark night of the soul. They went through a lot of emotional issues because the oil brings you there, and they slept a lot. But we're not allowed to use the C word here, but they no longer have cancer, and they didn't do anything differently besides take the oil. So people
1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really awesome. I enjoyed that documentary about Rick as well. It was it was definitely eye opening, and the whole like legal process that he went through, and how many of the challenges that he was facing, and how it was handled was just not what you would expect, you know?
Yeah, no, exactly. You know, he's an inspiration to me every day, and he's still out there. He's no longer living in Canada. He's living out in Europe somewhere, because I believe if he comes back to Canada at this, I mean, maybe it's changed because it's legalized, but I think he would have been thrown in jail. So
Okay.
for giving away free oil.
Yeah.
So.
And helping out a lot of people in the process too.
Yeah.
That was well documented.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's a crazy story. Yeah, and I'm sure that there's a lot of other stories just like that out there. It'd be cool to hear from more people as well. So, yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed this, Chris. I love that you're really passionate about this, and that there's a lot of value you can add to people out there that are looking to actually make use of the product and to their benefit, and to others' benefit as well. So that's it's already been I think about an hour, and like if it's felt like 5 minutes go by, and I could keep talking about this for a long time. But how about we can kind of wrap it up for now, and then I'd love to have you come back, and then we'll hear about how your business is going, and well, you know, any advancements that are coming. You're my go-to guy from now on.
Okay, thanks so much. Appreciate it. It's been a lot
All
of
right,
fun.
thanks. Absolutely. So thanks for coming on, Chris. This has been MedTech Trends with Dorian and Chris Macmillan signing off for now. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.